Karoline Leavitt walked into the courtroom, expecting nothing more than a routine hearing. But when the judge, without any hesitation, handed down a fine, something felt off. It was as if he hadn't even taken the time to consider the full picture. What no one knew, not even the judge, was that Karoline wasn't just another defendant. She was a legal genius with a plan that would turn the tables on everything. Before we begin the story, don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel to help us reach 1,000 subscribers soon. Your support is the motivation that drives us to create even more engaging content. Thank you. It was just another ordinary Tuesday for Sam. The sun was barely breaking through the clouds, casting a pale glow on the wet streets. He walked into the small diner, the bell above the door jingling lightly as he entered. He'd come here for the same reason he did every week, a cup of coffee and a quiet corner to think. It was a simple pleasure in a complicated world. Sam, a man in his mid-50s, had learned to appreciate life's quieter moments. He wasn't anyone important. His faded jeans and unpolished shoes didn't stand out in a crowd. He had spent most of his life working in various odd jobs, never holding on to one for too long, just trying to get by. It was what people like him did, just existed, day by day, in the background of the world's chaos. He took a seat at his usual table near the window and nodded to the waitress, Diane, who greeted him with a warm smile. But today, things didn't feel quite right. Sam couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The room, usually bustling with quiet chatter and the clink of silverware, felt oddly tense. Then, it happened. A man in a suit, who Sam had never seen before, approached his table. He was wearing a navy blue blazer and crisp dress shoes. The kind of man who didn't belong in this place. Sam watched as he gave him a look of disdain, his eyes scanning Sam from head to toe. Then sneering, "We don't serve your kind here," the man said coldly, voice dripping with superiority. Sam blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" The man's lips curled into a mockery of a smile as he turned to Diane, ignoring Sam entirely. "Take care of it," he snapped. Diane, usually the picture of kindness, hesitated. She opened her mouth to protest, but the man's icy stare silenced her. She looked at Sam with a mix of apology and fear, before nodding reluctantly. "I'm sorry, but you'll have to leave," she said quietly. The words hit Sam like a slap in the face. His heart raced, but his body felt heavy. He stood up slowly, the weight of the moment sinking in. People around him had stopped talking, glancing over as the scene unfolded. But no one said a word. The man was a regular customer, a VIP, perhaps, and Sam was nothing more than an invisible face to them. They wouldn't risk losing business for a stranger. Is this really happening? Sam thought, the sharp sting of humiliation creeping up his neck. But the words stuck in his throat. He felt a knot forming deep inside. The realization that the injustice wasn't just about him. It was something larger, something systemic, embedded into the fabric of society. As he walked out of the diner, the door slamming shut behind him, Sam's mind raced. He wasn't just dealing with one rude customer. This was bigger. It was everywhere, and he had just been the latest victim. And in that moment, Sam knew this wouldn't be the last time. The sun had sunk low in the sky, casting long shadows across the sidewalk as Sam stepped into the small coffee shop. Still reeling from the earlier incident, his mind buzzed with frustration. But he was determined to go about his day, to hold on to some semblance of normalcy. However, the weight of the earlier encounter lingered, gnawing at him, like a thorn lodged too deep to pull free. Inside the coffee shop, the usual quiet hum of conversation filled the air, but Sam's nerves were too frayed to take comfort in the calm. He waited in line, feeling the pressure of his thoughts closing in on him. Just as he was about to order, the same man from the diner, tall, sharp-dressed, and carrying that same air of superiority, walked in. He barely glanced at Sam, but the recognition in Sam's eyes was enough. Without a word, the man stepped forward to the counter and, in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, began speaking to the barista. "I'll have my usual," he said smoothly, his gaze sweeping across the room, making sure everyone was watching. He turned, as if by chance, and locked eyes with Sam. A glimmer of something, contempt? Amusement? Flickered across his face. Sam stood frozen, an instinctive knot forming in his stomach. It wasn't enough that the man had humiliated him at the diner, now here he was, ensuring that everyone knew who was in charge. "Don't you think it's a little too crowded in here for someone like you?" the man said, turning his words into a public remark meant to put Sam in his place once more. Sam's hands clenched by his sides. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. His throat tightened, and a flush of embarrassment flooded his chest. The silence in the coffee shop seemed to grow louder, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for his reaction. "Hey," Sam finally managed, his voice a mixture of frustration and hurt. "That's not necessary. You don't have to talk to me like that." The man raised an eyebrow and smirked, as if Sam's attempt at standing up for himself were laughable. "Oh, I think it is. Maybe you should know your place before you try to act important around here." A soft gasp came from behind the counter as the barista, a young woman named Lucy, hesitated. She looked back and forth between Sam and the man, her face betraying a mix of concern and fear. Sam saw her fingers trembling as she fumbled with the coffee machine, the tension hanging in the air thick and uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, sir," Lucy said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. I'll have to ask you to leave." Sam felt his heart sink. It wasn't just the man's words, it was the way he'd manipulated everyone into agreeing with him. Lucy, the barista, had no choice but to follow the unwritten rules of the coffee shop, where his kind always won, and people like Sam, the invisible ones, always lost. "You heard her," the man sneered at Sam. "It's time for you to go." Sam could feel the heat rising in his face, his palms sweating as he fought to suppress the anger threatening to explode. He wanted to shout, to demand some kind of justice. But what good would that do? The man would walk out unscathed, and Sam would once again be the one left behind, a victim of the same system that had already crushed him once. With a final glance at the man, who was now enjoying his small victory, Sam turned to leave. His steps were slow, deliberate, as if the weight of his failure was pulling him down, inch by inch. The door shut behind him with a soft thud, and for a moment, Sam just stood there, staring at the bustling world outside, feeling more isolated than ever. As he walked down the street, his hands balled into fists at his sides, his mind racing. This wasn't just about him. It wasn't just about a rude customer or a simple disagreement. It was something much larger, something Sam could no longer ignore. There was a system in place that allowed men like him to keep winning, while people like Sam, the quiet ones, kept losing. He walked a little faster now, the anger in his chest pushing him forward. He didn't know where this was going, but he knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over. The weight of the public humiliation still hung over Sam as he stepped into the office the following day. He walked through the same hallway, the same doors, but everything felt different. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting a cold glow over everything. He couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was watching him, silently judging him. No one spoke to him. No one made eye contact. It was as if he had become invisible, reduced to nothing more than a ghost in a building that had once felt like home. Sam had hoped that the storm would pass, that the day after would feel like any other. But the reality was far different. The phone calls he had tried to make for help went unanswered, and his emails were ignored. His name was already being smeared across the workplace. The rumors had started to circulate, rumors that weren't just hurtful but false. Trying to defend himself felt like fighting a war with invisible enemies. Every piece of evidence he found was either erased or buried under layers of bureaucracy. And those who would have supported him were now too scared to even speak. A few of his colleagues, people he thought were friends, had already distanced themselves. The whispers of troublemaker or liar echoed in his mind, leaving him in a state of constant self-doubt. Sam spent the next few days sifting through his options, trying to find any way to clear his name. He called a lawyer, but the response was lukewarm at best. Every avenue he attempted was either blocked or silenced by those in power. His hope was slowly draining away. He didn't know how much longer he could hold on to his job, his dignity, or his sanity. Then came the shocking blow. Late one afternoon, he received a call from his manager, Mr. Harris. The tone in Mr. Harris' voice was cold and impersonal. "Sam, "We need to talk," he said, his words clipped. "It's about your position here." When Sam arrived at the office, Mr. Harris was already waiting for him, sitting behind his desk, the usual stern expression on his face. He didn't offer Sam a seat but instead began reading from a prepared document. "After reviewing the recent incident and the ongoing investigation, we've made the decision to terminate your employment, effective immediately." Sam felt the air in his lungs freeze. "Wait, what? You can't be serious," he protested, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm being blamed for something I didn't do. I'm the one who's been wronged here." But Mr. Harris wasn't listening. "It's final, Sam. You've been a liability to the company. We can't risk further damage to our reputation. I'm sorry, but this is out of my hands." Sam stood there, unable to process what he was hearing. He had worked at this company for years. He had given everything to it. And now, in a matter of seconds, it had all been ripped away. He wasn't just losing his job, he was being labeled as someone untrustworthy. Someone who didn't belong. His hands clenched into fists as the reality of the situation sunk in. On his way out of the office, Sam passed by several colleagues. Not one of them looked him in the eye. It was as if they were all afraid to acknowledge his existence. Afraid to be seen with the man who had been let go under mysterious circumstances. As he passed by, one of the younger employees, Claire, quickly turned her head, as if she hadn't seen him at all. His heart sank even lower. Outside, Sam stood under the harsh glow of the streetlights, the cool breeze biting at his skin. It was dark now, and the city felt colder than ever. His life was unraveling, and there was no one around to help him piece it back together. As he walked home that night, his mind raced with questions. How could this have happened? Why was he the one punished for something he hadn't done? And what could he possibly do to fight back when it seemed like the whole system was stacked against him? The answer came when he least expected it. While walking, he passed an old friend from his earlier days at the company, John, who now worked in a different department. John was hesitant at first, but then, as if something shifted inside him, he approached Sam. "I heard what happened," John said, lowering his voice. "You need to know, you're not the only one. This isn't the first time this kind of thing has happened." Sam's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice shaking. John looked around nervously before speaking again. "There have been others. People who tried to speak out, tried to do the right thing. They got pushed out too. You're not alone in this, Sam. There's more going on here than you realize." The words hit Sam like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just a personal attack. This was part of something much larger, something systemic, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't the only one who had been hurt. There were others like him, people who had been silenced and pushed aside. And now, Sam knew that he couldn't back down. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had been wronged. The days following Sam's firing dragged on. Each one felt like he was walking through thick mud, his every step weighed down by the heavy burden of what had happened. The sting of rejection, the sense of betrayal, it was all still fresh in his mind. But it wasn't just the loss of his job that haunted him. It was the knowledge that something larger, something far more systemic, was at play here. As Sam continued to sift through the wreckage of his life, he began to see the pattern that he hadn't noticed before. The more he thought about it, the more he realized this wasn't just about one man, one incident. No, this was part of a bigger machine, a system designed to keep people like him down. The man at the coffee shop, his manager, even the quiet whispers in the hallways, all of them were part of a network that allowed the powerful to push the powerless around. He sat in his small apartment, a cup of coffee cooling in front of him, his hands trembling as he went through old files on his laptop. He was searching for something, anything, that could help him understand what had happened. To prove that it wasn't just his word against theirs. But with every document he opened, his frustration grew. There was no clear evidence. No smoking gun. Everything was either hidden or erased. The people who might have helped, the ones who knew what was really going on, were too afraid to speak up. Sam tried reaching out to some of his old coworkers, the ones he'd trusted, but all of them had one excuse or another for why they couldn't help. One told him, "I'm sorry, I don't want to get involved." Another said, I'm not sure I can do anything without putting myself at risk. It was clear that fear had gripped them all. The system had worked its magic. And it had left Sam standing alone. But he wasn't ready to give up, not yet. One evening, while scrolling through his old emails, he came across a strange message. It was from Claire, someone he'd worked with closely at the company. The email was short, just a few lines. I know what happened. It read, you're not the only one. They've done this before. You need to know the truth. Sam's heart skipped a beat. Claire was one of the few who hadn't completely turned her back on him. She'd always been quiet, reserved, but Sam had seen glimpses of her strength before. And now, she was reaching out. He immediately wrote back, asking her what she meant. But the reply he received was chilling. It's too dangerous to talk over email. Meet me. I'll explain everything. They agreed to meet the next day at a small cafe in the corner of the city, far away from the prying eyes of their old workplace. When Sam arrived, he spotted Claire immediately. She was sitting by the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, her eyes scanning the room nervously. Sam sat down across from her. What's going on, Claire? What did you mean by, they've done this before? She looked around the cafe, ensuring they weren't being watched. Before leaning in closer, I've seen it happen, she said in a low voice. It's not just you. People get pushed out all the time. The same people, over and over again. I don't know how they do it, but they always find a way to make sure the ones who speak up don't get to stay. They've destroyed careers, ruined reputations. Sam felt his blood run cold. So you're telling me this is bigger than just one bad decision? That this is happening to others, too? Claire nodded slowly. It's a pattern, Sam. People who get in the way, who try to do what's right, they vanish. They make it look like a mistake, like they're just not fit for the job. And everyone believes it. No one questions it. No one wants to risk their own neck. Sam could hardly believe what he was hearing. It wasn't just a few isolated incidents, it was a deliberate, calculated effort to silence those who dared to speak out. The system, the very system that Sam had once trusted, was built to maintain the power of those at the top while keeping the rest of them in line. Is that why you didn't say anything before? Sam asked, his voice trembling. Why no one stood up for me? Claire's face softened, and she sighed heavily. I wish I could have helped. But I'm scared. Sam, I've seen people lose everything. Careers, families, lives. It's not just about the company, it's about making sure that nothing changes. You try to stand up, and you're out. Sam sat back in his chair, the weight of her words settling over him. For the first time, he understood. This wasn't just about him. This was a system that needed to be broken. And he was going to be the one to break it. Before they parted ways, Claire handed Sam a small envelope. This has something that might help, she said quietly. I don't know if it's enough, but it's all I can give you. Sam opened the envelope after he left the cafe. Inside, there was a small flash drive. It wasn't much, but it was something. He didn't know what was on it, but he knew it was important. As Sam stood there, holding the flash drive in his hand, he felt a surge of determination rise in him. The pieces were starting to come together. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. But it wouldn't be easy. Sam stood at the edge of his small apartment, gazing out at the city lights below. The weight of the world felt heavier with each passing day. His mind constantly ran through the same painful thoughts, his job, his reputation, his sense of self. Everything had been taken from him. The quiet, relentless pressure was beginning to feel like it would break him. But deep down, Sam knew that he couldn't let it. He couldn't just let them win. He had to find a way to fight back. It was just after dusk when the phone call came. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but there was something about it that made Sam sit up straighter, instinctively knowing that this call could be different. The voice was steady, but urgent. Sam, you don't know me, but I've been following what's been happening to you. The man said, I've got something that might change everything. Sam's heart skipped a beat. Who are you? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. My name's Jason. I used to work with your manager, back when he was first getting into power. I know what he's done. I've seen it firsthand, and I think I can help you. Jason's words came in short bursts, as though he was constantly looking over his shoulder. I've got a piece of evidence, Something that could expose him for what he really is. But using it, that's another story. It could ruin everything for me. My career, my reputation. You have to understand, this is dangerous. Sam felt his pulse quicken. The words, piece of evidence, lingered in his mind. Was this the break he had been waiting for? Why are you doing this? Sam asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Jason hesitated, because I can't stand by any longer and watch him ruin lives. I've seen it happen too many times. I thought I could ignore it. But now, I can't. You're not the first person he's crushed. Sam, there are others like you. People who tried to stand up, only to be crushed by the system he controls. And now, I've got the proof. Sam leaned forward, gripping the phone tighter. What's the proof? What do you have? I can't explain over the phone. Jason said quickly. Meet me. I'll bring the evidence. We'll talk, and you'll see why this is bigger than just your case. Jason gave him an address, an old warehouse on the outskirts of town, and told him to come alone. The air felt thick with tension as Sam stared at the phone for a moment, wondering what he was getting himself into. But something in Jason's voice told him this was real. This was his chance. The next day, Sam found himself driving to the warehouse. The streets outside empty and silent. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the cracked concrete as he parked his car and approached the old building. The area was desolate, a far cry from the bustling city streets he was used to. This was a place where people went to hide. When he entered the warehouse, the first thing he noticed was the smell, musty, stale, like something had been locked away for far too long. It was eerily quiet, except for the faint sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. Jason was waiting near a stack of old crates, his face obscured by the dim lighting. As Sam approached, he gave a slight nod. I'm glad you came, Jason said, his voice low. I wasn't sure you would. Sam nodded but didn't say anything. His mind was racing. He needed to see what Jason had. Jason pulled a small flash drive from his pocket and handed it over. This is it, he said. Everything. Proof that he's been manipulating the system to his benefit. Covering his tracks. Destroying lives. The evidence is all here. Sam took the flash drive, holding it in his hand like it was the most important thing in the world. He felt the weight of it, the promise it held, but also the danger. This could change everything for him, but it could also cost him more than he was ready to pay. You know what this means, right? Jason asked, his eyes locking onto Sam's. If we use this, if we go public, they'll come after us. They'll destroy us. You're putting everything on the line. Are you ready for that? Sam looked down at the flash drive, his fingers brushing over its surface. For a moment, everything felt still. The weight of his decision pressed down on him, like a storm about to break. He thought about everything he'd lost, his job, his dignity, his sense of self, and he thought about the people Jason had mentioned, the others who had been crushed and silenced. He had to do this, not just for him, but for everyone who had been pushed aside, forgotten, abused by the system. I'm ready, Sam said, his voice firm despite the fear that crept up his spine. I'm ready to fight back. Jason gave him a solemn nod. But before he could say anything more, Sam's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his heart sinking as he saw the number on the screen. It was his old manager. What is it now? Sam muttered under his breath. Jason glanced at him, reading the situation in an instant. They know, Jason said, his voice urgent. They're onto you. They've figured out someone's digging around. It's only a matter of time before they make their move. You have to act fast. Before Sam could respond, the phone rang again. The name on the screen was unmistakable. It was his manager. Mr. Harris. Sam took a deep breath. This was it, the moment everything changed. The city lights flickered in the distance as Sam stood in the small corner of his apartment, feeling the weight of everything that had gone wrong. The walls, once his sanctuary, now felt like a prison. It wasn't just the loss of his job or the damage to his reputation that gnawed at him, it was the betrayal. The crushing realization that the system he once trusted was broken, and he was its latest casualty. In the days following the news of his downfall, the world had quickly turned its back on him. The whispers and glances from people he once considered friends were enough to send a chill down his spine. But the worst of it came from the media. They had spun his story into something unrecognizable, painting him as a disgruntled employee, a liar, a man with a personal vendetta. They couldn't be further from the truth. Sam knew it was only a matter of time before the full weight of the lies came crashing down on him. The people he trusted, his so-called allies, were beginning to distance themselves. Every time he reached out for help, there was no one there. His co-workers who had once supported him now turned their backs, afraid of getting caught up in the chaos. Even the few who had stood by him quietly began to waver, their faces etched with uncertainty. The phone calls stopped. The messages of encouragement turned into silence. His friends from work no longer texted back. Sam was alone in this fight. It was in this isolation that the truth hit him. He wasn't just fighting for his career anymore. He was fighting against a system that had been broken for far too long. A system that preyed on those like him, the powerless, the overlooked, the forgotten. And yet, as much as he understood this, a part of him still clung to the hope that he could somehow make things right. He wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The first few days after the smear campaign had been a blur. His name had been dragged through the mud, and the lies spread faster than he could process. He was suddenly the villain of a story he didn't even recognize. And what hurt the most was that no one cared to ask his side of the story. No one cared to look deeper, to understand the truth. But even as the world seemed to crumble around him, Sam's determination remained. He still had the evidence. He still had the truth. And he would find a way to make it count, no matter the cost. One evening, after a particularly long day of facing the world's cold indifference, Sam sat in his apartment, his mind swirling with frustration and hopelessness. His fingers traced the edge of the flash drive Jason had given him. It seemed so small, so insignificant compared to the weight of the battle ahead. But in that tiny device was the key to everything. His phone buzzed suddenly, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Jason. "I know you're struggling right now, but we can't let them win. I've got a plan. We can turn this around." Sam read the message over and over again, the words offering a glimmer of hope. But doubts crept in. What if it was too late? What if he had already lost? But as the message sank in, something shifted within him. He couldn't just sit back and watch everything fall apart. He couldn't let the system keep people like him silent. Not anymore. He had to act. The next morning, Sam woke up with a fire in his chest, something he hadn't felt in days. There was no more room for hesitation. He had nothing left to lose. He grabbed his coat, his car keys, and the flash drive, heading straight to the place where it all began, the office. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going down without a fight. The streets were eerily quiet as he drove, the usual buzz of traffic muted by his thoughts. When he reached the building, the weight of the decision hit him. This was it, no turning back now. As he stepped into the office lobby, the receptionist looked up at him, her expression blank. She knew what had been happening. Everyone did, but Sam didn't stop. He kept walking, his eyes fixed ahead, as if he had a mission, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. "Sam!" A voice called out from behind him. It was his old coworker, Rachel, the one person who had always had his back. But even she looked uneasy, glancing over her shoulder before approaching him. "What are you doing here?" she whispered urgently. "They're watching you." "I'm here to make things right," Sam said, his voice low but firm. "I have something they don't want anyone to see, and I'm going to make sure the truth comes out, no matter what it costs." Rachel hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Be careful, Sam. You're walking into the storm." But Sam didn't care. The storm was already here, and he was ready to face it head on. As he entered the elevator, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. His heart raced, but he pushed the fear aside. This was his moment. This was his fight. When the doors opened to his old floor, the tension in the air was palpable. He could feel eyes on him, the silence thick with the weight of his presence. But he didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the office of his manager, Mr. Harris, his hand clenched tightly around the flash drive. "Mr. Harris," Sam said, his voice steady, "it's time for you to answer for your actions." Mr. Harris looked up from his desk, his expression cold and calculated. "What do you want, Sam?" "You know exactly what I want," Sam replied. "I want the truth." And I want you to take responsibility for what you've done." The room was dead silent. The tension so thick that it felt like it could snap at any moment. Sam stood there, facing down the man who had been the architect of his downfall. But as he stood there, something unexpected happened. His phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from the news. He glanced at it, his heart sinking as he read the headline. Sam Mitchell, the liar who tried to bring down a company. It was happening. The media had already begun their attack. But Sam wasn't backing down. He couldn't. Not now. Not after everything he had been through. He turned back to Mr. Harris. His eyes locked onto his manager's cold stare. "This isn't over," Sam said, his voice rising with conviction. "Not by a long shot." And with that, he walked out of the office. The storm brewing inside of him stronger than ever before. The quiet hum of the city was deafening in Sam's ears as he sat in the dimly lit room, staring at the screen in front of him. The flash drive lay there, innocuous and small, yet it held the power to unravel everything. He had been hunting for this piece of evidence for so long. And now that it was in his hands, it almost didn't feel real. It was a recording, a simple video that captured a moment of the truth, one that had been buried for far too long. Sam had no idea how long he'd been sitting there, his fingers idly tracing the edges of the drive. But now, there was no turning back. This video wasn't just a piece of evidence, it was his lifeline. It was everything he needed to show the world the corruption he had been fighting against. The truth he had known all along, the truth that had cost him so much, was finally going to be exposed. The decision was clear now. He couldn't keep waiting. He had to act. Standing up, Sam grabbed his coat, the cool leather scraping against his hand as he slipped it on. He moved with a sense of urgency now, every step a reminder of how close he was to the end of this long, exhausting fight. But there was still more to be done, more that had to be exposed. The only way forward was to make this public, to take the risk and push the truth into the light. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was Jason's name on the screen, his old ally and the only person who had stuck by him through this entire ordeal. Sam didn't hesitate, answering the call immediately. "Jason," Sam said, his voice tight with anticipation. "I've got it. I've got the evidence. The video." There was a brief pause on the other end, and then Jason's voice came through, sharp and urgent. "It's time. Are you sure? Once you show this, there's no turning back." "I know," Sam replied. "I'm ready." The weight of his words hit him harder than he expected. He had made this choice many times in his mind, but saying it out loud made it feel final. He was no longer just fighting for his own innocence. He was fighting for the truth, and he would make sure the world knew it. Jason's voice softened, but there was still a note of concern. "You know what this means, right? Once it's out there, you'll be targeted. You'll be painted as a villain." "I know," Sam said again, his voice stronger now. "But I'm done being silent. It's time for the world to know what happened." He ended the call, his fingers shaking as he put the phone down. The moment had come. Sam walked out of his apartment and down the stairs, the city's quiet streets now feeling too still, too empty. He was on a mission, and there was no turning back. He didn't know how this would end, but he knew one thing. He was going to make sure the truth was heard. Arriving at the office building, Sam took a deep breath before walking inside. The familiar smell of paper and coffee greeted him, but it no longer felt like home. It felt like a battlefield, a place where his fight had begun, and where it would come to a head. He had spent weeks trying to get to this moment, and now that it was here, everything else seemed insignificant. The elevator ride was the longest of his life. The soft hum of the cables, the quiet anticipation hanging in the air, it all felt like a countdown. When the doors finally opened, Sam stepped into the lobby. He walked past the receptionist, who barely glanced up, her eyes avoiding his as she focused on her computer screen. The silence was suffocating. The walls seemed to close in on him, each step echoing in the emptiness. He could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders, but he pushed it aside. He wasn't afraid anymore. He made his way to the conference room, where the press conference was set to take place. As he entered, he saw a few familiar faces, reporters, camera crews, and staff members who had been a part of this journey. They looked at him with a mix of curiosity and doubt. Unsure of what to expect, Sam walked to the front, his heart pounding, but his hands steady. He placed the flash drive on the table in front of him, his voice steady as he spoke into the microphone. "This," he said, "is the truth. The truth about everything that's been going on behind closed doors. The truth that's been hidden from all of you." The room fell silent as the camera lights flickered on. He could feel every eye on him. But he didn't waver. He pressed play, and the video began to roll. The footage was undeniable. It showed Mr. Harris, the man responsible for everything Sam had been accused of, making the very decisions that had led to his downfall. Sam watched as Harris's voice echoed through the room, his lies and manipulations clear for all to see. As the video played, Sam could see the shift in the room. The reporters were no longer focused on him. They were focused on the screen, on the proof in front of them. The doubt, the suspicion, they were all gone. Mr. Harris stood up, his face pale with shock, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to formulate a defense. But no words came. The damage had been done. "You can try to deny it," Sam said, his voice rising, "but the truth is out there now, and no one can take it back." Just then, the door opened, and Sam turned to see a few familiar faces walk in: lawyers, investigators, even a few government officials who had been following his case from the start. It was clear now that things were escalating beyond his control. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was bigger than any one person. The fight had reached the point where even those in power could no longer ignore it. Sam stood tall as the storm around him began to grow. He had done what he set out to do. He had exposed the truth. And now, he would stand by it, no matter what came next. The room was heavy with silence as the final words of the press conference lingered in the air. The truth had been laid bare for all to see, and Sam could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. For months, he had fought for this moment, for the chance to expose the corruption that had consumed his life. And now it was done. The evidence was irrefutable, the truth undeniable, but as the reporters filed out of the room, their whispers and the distant sound of clicking cameras echoing in his ears, Sam couldn't help but feel the bitter taste of something lost. The public reaction had been swift and overwhelming. It was as if the floodgates had opened, and the world had divided itself into two factions: those who believed in the truth and those who refused to accept it. The voices in support of Sam's actions were loud and unwavering, but the defenders of the corrupt system fought just as fiercely, their accusations of evidence tampering and misinformation gaining traction in some corners of the media. Sam's heart sank as he scrolled through his phone, reading the comments, the articles, and the heated debates. Some praised him as a hero. Others vilified him as a pawn in a political game. It was a battle for perception now, one that he knew would shape his future for years to come. But it didn't matter how many people doubted him, how many sought to discredit him. The truth had been exposed, and it was out of his hands now. A text message popped up on his screen. It was from his lawyer, Grace. The words were short but direct: "You're getting your reputation back. But at a cost. They're coming after you. Watch your back." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had known that the fight wasn't over, that the forces behind the scenes would not back down easily. But hearing it so plainly made the reality of his situation more concrete. He had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Sam stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline as the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the buildings below. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on his shoulders. He had exposed the lies, but the people responsible for them still held power. They still had influence, and they would use it to destroy him if they could. As he stood there, lost in thought, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from someone he hadn't heard from in a long time: Jason. His former colleague, the one person who had always believed in him. "Sam." Jason's voice came through the phone, his tone somber. "It's not over. You've made a powerful enemy, and they won't stop coming for you." Sam's heart raced, his mind already racing through the possibilities. "What do you mean?" "The people you've exposed, they have connections, Sam. They've got people in high places who will do anything to protect their own. You need to be careful. They'll come for you in ways you won't expect." Sam ran his hand through his hair, his thoughts swirling. He had known this was coming, but hearing it from Jason made it feel all the more real. He had to keep moving forward. But now, more than ever, he needed to be careful. "Thanks for the heads up," Sam replied, his voice steady despite the fear that was creeping into his chest. "I'll be ready." The call ended, and Sam sat back down at his desk, his fingers trembling as he opened the documents in front of him. He had been prepared to fight for the truth, but now, he realized that the fight was far bigger than he ever imagined. Hours passed, and Sam barely noticed the time slipping away as he went over his next moves. Making plans for what would come next. He couldn't let up now, not when he was so close to breaking the system wide open. He had exposed the truth, but there was still so much left to do. He couldn't afford to rest on his laurels. Suddenly, the door to his office creaked open, and in walked someone he wasn't expecting, Catherine, his former assistant. She had always been a quiet presence in the office, but in the wake of everything that had happened, she had gone silent. "Sam," she said softly, stepping inside, her eyes filled with concern. "I just wanted to check in on you. I know things are difficult right now." Sam glanced up, offering a weak smile. "I'm fine, just a lot to process." Catherine hesitated for a moment before speaking again. I don't know if this will help, but I have something I shouldn't have. It's a piece of information about Harris. It could be what you need to finally put an end to all of this." Sam's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the chance to get something more solid. Something that could turn the tide once and for all. "What do you have?" he asked, his voice low with anticipation. Catherine took a deep breath, her fingers trembling as she handed him a file. "It's a document that links Harris directly to the cover-up. If you can get this into the right hands, it'll be the nail in the coffin for him." Sam took the file from her, his pulse quickening as he glanced through the papers. This was it. This was the proof he needed. The truth that would finish what he started. But even as he held the file in his hands, he knew this was just the beginning. He wasn't safe. He was never going to be safe. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of hope that, maybe, just maybe, he could bring down the system that had wronged him and so many others. As he looked at the document, a new sense of determination settled over him. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. He had one more chance to take them down. And this time, he wasn't going to stop until they had no place left to hide. The once towering figure of Harris had been brought low. For weeks now, the media had been running the story, each headline a reminder of his fall from grace. But even as his reputation crumbled, Harris wasn't done fighting. The whispers behind closed doors had begun to surface, negotiations with those who still held power. Secret meetings with his allies in government and business, all aimed at minimizing the damage. Sam watched from the sidelines, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. He had won, yes, but it seemed like the fight had only just begun. Harris might have lost his high position, but his network of influence was far from gone. Sam had exposed the lies, but now it was time to see just how deep those lies ran, and how far Harris would go to protect whatever remained of his power. Sam had expected something like this, but seeing it unfold in real time felt surreal. In a quiet cafe on the corner of 3rd and Oak, he sat with his lawyer, Grace, watching the news coverage that continued to dominate the airwaves. The apology Harris had issued was nothing more than a carefully crafted statement, a masterclass in damage control. An attempt to claw back any shred of credibility. "The question now is whether the public will buy it," Grace said, looking up from the screen, her voice cautious. Sam didn't answer immediately. He had been expecting Harris to take the low road, to try and salvage what he could. But the apology, the phony tears on the screen, felt like another punch in the gut. It wasn't just the injustice that stung, it was the audacity. The sheer determination to remain in control despite everything. "I don't know," Sam said, running a hand through his hair. "It's like he's playing chess while I'm stuck in checkers." Grace gave him a pointed look. "You've made your move. It's just about waiting for his next one." Sam glanced at his phone. The constant stream of messages and calls only serving to remind him of how much had changed in the past few weeks. Some were from people who had stayed silent during the battle, now offering apologies and support. Others were from those who still clung to the old system, unwilling to let go of their loyalties to Harris. The awkward tension in the air was palpable. Those who had once watched Sam's struggle from afar now started to find their voices. A few came forward to apologize, admitting that they should have backed him sooner. But more than a few still turned away, choosing silence over confrontation. Sam felt it deep within himself, the isolation of his victory. This wasn't the triumphant return he had imagined. Yes, Harris was done for, but the world around Sam seemed to be unraveling. He had won, but at what cost? As he sat back in his chair, the weight of it all began to sink in. The victory had brought no closure, no peace. The problems were far from over. The system that had allowed Harris to rise so high was still in place. Still very much intact. Harris may have been a symbol of that system, but the system itself remained. And as far as Sam could see, no one was ready to tear it down. Where do we go from here? Sam asked, his voice hollow with uncertainty. Grace sighed, looking out the window, her face a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. You keep going. You fight to change the system. Even if it's slow, even if you're standing alone sometimes. It felt like an endless battle, one that had no clear end in sight. There would always be more corruption, more lies to expose, and with each victory, the cost would only rise. Sam had known it wouldn't be easy. But now, more than ever, it felt impossible. But as the evening wore on, Sam received a text that would change the course of his next steps. It was from a number he didn't recognize. You don't know me, but I know what you're doing. I have information that could stop Harris from regaining control. Meet me tomorrow at noon. At the old warehouse on 5th and Grand. You don't have much time. Sam's heart skipped a beat. He stared at the message, unsure of what to make of it. Was this a trap, or was it the breakthrough he'd been hoping for? He didn't know, but there was no way he could ignore it. Who's that? Grace asked, noticing the look on his face. Sam showed her the text. Grace's brow furrowed. This could be the real deal. But be careful, Sam. This could go either way. Sam nodded, his mind already racing. The timing was perfect and terrifying. If this was legitimate, it could be the piece of the puzzle he needed to bring everything crashing down for Harris. But if it was a setup, it could be the end of everything. I'll be there, Sam said, slipping his phone into his pocket. I can't afford not to. As he stood up, ready to face whatever awaited him, he felt the weight of the moment. He had come so far. But the hardest part was still ahead. Would this lead to the truth? Or would it lead to more lies? Sam didn't know, but he wasn't about to back down now. Sam stood at the window, his gaze drifting over the city skyline, the lights flickering like distant stars. It had been weeks since the storm had passed. Weeks since the public had turned their attention to the truth that had been hidden for so long. He had fought, he had sacrificed, and in the end, justice had prevailed. But in the silence that followed his victory, a feeling lingered, a weight that he couldn't shake. He had won this battle. Yes, but the war? That was far from over. The past few months had been nothing short of a whirlwind. From the moment he first stepped into the fight, he had been unsure of what would come next. Each day, each hour, had been a struggle, filled with the uncertainty of whether the truth would ever see the light. But now, as the dust settled and the world seemed to move on, Sam found himself at a crossroads. His name was cleared, the system had been shaken, but something inside him told him that this wasn't the end of the story. As Sam turned away from the window, his phone buzzed with a new notification. The headline caught his eye immediately. New whistleblower claims systemic corruption at another corporation. His stomach twisted. It was happening again. Another case, another injustice, another group of people who had been silenced by power, by fear, by the very system he had just taken down. It felt as though the fight would never end. He took a deep breath, scanning the article. This wasn't just a corporate scandal. No, this was bigger. The same type of manipulation, the same type of exploitation that he had uncovered in Harris' world, was alive and well in another corner of the business world. It was the same pattern, the same abuse of power, the same people paying the price for standing up. Sam set the phone down and walked to the window again, the weight of the world pressing on his chest. For the first time, he truly understood something. He had thought that by taking down Harris, by exposing the corruption, He would somehow change everything. But the truth was, the system was far too entrenched, far too complex. And now, he saw it clearly. He could fight this battle forever. But it would never truly end unless the system itself was dismantled. Just then, his phone rang again, and this time it was a message from Grace. "I need to talk. Meet me at the cafe. Something's come up." He read it twice, then grabbed his jacket. His heart raced. Something new was happening, and he wasn't sure if it was going to change everything, or if it would only pull him deeper into a fight he couldn't win. At the cafe, Grace was waiting for him, her usual calm demeanor replaced with a seriousness that made Sam's stomach churn. She didn't even greet him properly, just gestured for him to sit. "Sam," she said, her voice low, "I've been in touch with someone who's been watching everything, and they think you're the one who can make a real difference." Sam frowned, sitting down. "I don't know what that means." "Grace, I've already fought one battle. It's over." "No," Grace said, shaking her head. "It's not over. What you did, what we all did, that was just the beginning. There's a bigger story, something that goes deeper than just one man, one corporation. If you want to end this, you'll have to take on the entire system. And it won't be easy." Sam stared at her, his mind racing. It was true. Everything was true. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just about exposing one villain. It was about pulling back the curtain on a society that had turned a blind eye to its own failures. And then Grace dropped the bombshell. "There's someone who can help," she said. "Someone on the inside, but they're scared. They want to meet, but they need to know you're serious. This could change everything, but you need to decide. Do you keep fighting, or do you let go?" Sam's heart raced. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when everything would either fall into place or come crashing down around him. He stared at Grace, his mind whirling with thoughts of the life he had built, the people he had lost, and the future that was now uncertain. What choice could he make? He knew the answer even before he said it. "I'll keep fighting," he said, his voice steady. "I don't know what the next step is, but I can't stop now. I didn't get this far just to give up." Grace nodded, a small, approving smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Then let's get to work." As Sam walked out of the cafe, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't the end. The battle wasn't over. And maybe, just maybe, he could change the system, one step at a time. But as he walked to his car, something caught his eye, just across the street. A figure standing in the shadows. Someone watching him. His pulse quickened. He had no idea who it was. But he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. And the fight for justice was far from finished. As the story unfolds, we realize that what we see at first glance isn't always the full picture. Karoline's journey is a reminder that intelligence and resilience can turn the tables. Even in the most unjust situations. In life, it's not always the loudest voice that prevails, but the one that knows how to navigate the complexities of the system. What do you think? How far would you go to fight for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you? Don't forget to subscribe to Shadow Secrets for more stories that uncover the truth, challenge the system, and inspire us all to stand up for justice.